The time is just gone 9:38 a.m. as we continue with news and views this morning. Our focus now, looking at one of our international stories this morning, is to take a look at China and looking at Xinjiang. Now, for far too long, we know how secretive the Chinese government has been, never letting out anything, and particularly when it comes to the Uyghurs out in the Xinjiang region, very little comes through from the Chinese government. But we've learned about the UN report being released on China, and China doing its utmost to try and prevent the release of this report. We're joined by EU policy coordinator at the World Uyghur Congress, Koen Stoop. Koen, welcome to the show. An absolute pleasure having you with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, as I mentioned, China are doing its utmost to try and prevent the release of this report. Now, this is a government that is highly secretive. They don't let out much, particularly in China, through their media. But Xinjiang has been going on for decades, for far too long. And Chinese atrocities, their abuses. We have heard about concentration camps in that part of the world. And this is the very reason as to why China is actually trying to prevent the release of this report.
I think the reason that China is trying to prevent this report is very simple. We all believe that whatever the United Nations and the UN High Commissioner has found in their investigations is very much in line with what the international community, civil society organizations, researchers have said that is happening in the region for over the past 4 years, which is, as you mentioned, concentration camps, forced labor, forced sterilization, separation of children from their families. So all these findings that the UN's report will undoubtedly contain. Of course, China tries all in its power to prevent this from coming out because it will put China in this very bad daylight, and it will show that what China is saying that it does in the region is actually false. It's actually an instance of severe human rights violations and has nothing to do with counterterrorism or poverty alleviation as the Chinese government hold. So I think the report it will really has the capacity to really show what is going on in the region.
Yes, and it will be quite interesting to see, how in depth this report is and the revelations, because we've seen the United States, for instance, come very very strong against China. We've seen Joe Biden, the remarks that he's made with regard to China and all these violations that are taking place against the Uyghurs. But just looking at it from an EU perspective, and just how does the European Union view China and particularly with the Uyghur issue?
I think there definitely been a change in the way that the European Union has viewed China. Of course, over the past 4 years, the European Union has consistently spoken out against the human rights abuses against the Uyghurs. However, indeed, what is necessary now is concrete action, and we've seen especially the European Parliament taking a very strong position on what is happening in East Turkestan in the Uyghur region. Just a month ago, it adopted a resolution in which it recognized what China is doing to the Uyghurs amounts to crimes against humanity, and said this might very well be a serious risk of genocide. So we see the European Union, also taking these steps and kind of, reconsidering their relations with China. I think also if you view this against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, where of course the EU has come to see that its dependencies on Russia are very much also a danger to the European Union's own security. And I think it's also it's also realizing now that its dependencies on China, mainly economically, also in the long term might very well harm the EU's own interests. Especially if the EU wants to, keep calling out what is happening in the Uyghur region, taking a strong stance against China. I think the EU needs to be better prepared for, taking autonomous measures against these kinds of instances of human rights violations.
Yes, and also with China trying to prevent the release of this report, is China in a position to stop the release of this report?
China does hold a lot of power within the United Nations, and this is not something that we're only seeing with the release of the report. Over the past years, the Chinese government has tried everything in its power at the United Nations to really silence any criticism of what it is doing against the Uyghurs. For instance, every Human Rights Council session, many Human Rights Council sessions, there are statements made by countries that express concern about what is happening to the Uyghurs. In response, China tries to lead counter statements, showing support not only by China itself, of course, but also from other countries worldwide, that what China is doing is actually a right thing. So we see that China is doing everything in its power to silence any criticism. China has, over the past few years, proposed several resolutions about human rights that really revisit, our international understanding of human rights. The concept of human rights as the foundation upon which the United Nations has been built since the Second World War. So we see that China has been doing this over the past few years, and I think now with the report, it's very much in line of China's behavior at the United Nations, trying to silence any criticism against what it's doing to the Uyghurs, and trying to ensure that whatever the United Nations is publicly publishing is as weakly worded as possible. We've seen the visit of the UN High Commissioner, for instance, earlier this year, where the High Commissioner was completely getting along with China's story, and mentioned these instances of counterterrorism which are not factual and which are not reflecting the reality what is happening in the Uyghur region. So we see that China is using its diplomatic, its political, and its economic power to silence any criticism at the United Nations.
And just finally, Kun, how strong is this push for this report to be released within the UN?
I mean, there are many actors worldwide that have consistently called upon the High Commissioner to release a report. Not only civil society, not only the World Uyghur Congress or the Uyghur community, but human rights organizations worldwide, but also governments and their representatives at the United Nations have consistently called upon the High Commissioner to release a report. Important to highlight that this report was believed to already be ready last year in December, when the Office of the High Commissioner said it would be only a matter of weeks before the report was published. So the delay is completely it's impossible to understand why this report has been delayed in the first place, because civil society organizations, also governments, have consistently called for this report to be released, because it is an important report. It is an independent investigation in what is happening in the Uyghur region, and it might very well bring a big change to our international understanding of the situation.
Well, Kun, thank you very much for that, and we appreciate you taking time out talking to us this morning. We wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me.
Koen Stoop joining us, EU Policy Coordinator at the World Uyghur Congress. And with that, we're going to go for a break. We come back unpacking the Practical Journey's various campaigns with Fahima Arnold, the Executive Member and Coordinator of the Women Empowerment Group at the Practical Journey.